I was definitely tottering on the edge of negativity during my antagonist's rant so far, even though I did try my, well, not very best, but at least attempted to twist it towards a more positive direction. I wanted to highlight one of the examples where individual characters were done in a way that I find interesting and very much likable, checking the boxes that I want to in female antagonists. And even though I've said that there are still some things in that one example that I would like to avoid in my stories because they are just heavily influenced by our world standards, which is something I don't want to drag into a completely different universe. That exception is again a bit of a spoiler regarding my future project, but since I've already mentioned it many times in my prior videos, it doesn't really matter. And it's Baldur's Gate 2. They really weren't afraid to portray women as evil, just evil, the same way male characters are portrayed in so many games and other media. They really used to be a rare exception. I mean, BioWare, the developer, to the current rather sad state. And it's not just current, it's I feel like it's always been that way. The more I think about it and the more I focus on it in their games, they managed to craft some rather interesting female villains that felt natural, that felt fully fledged in some cases not so much. As I've mentioned already, Valshares from Neverwinter Nights is not exactly a character, but others are in a better state, and Baldur's Gate is a great example of that. I have to admit to something of a mistake that I've made with one of them, Bodhi, a vampire exile and a former elf. I said that she falls under that category of female villains that are in reality controlled by an even bigger evil male villain, and that's not entirely her case. She still kinda does what she's told to do by her brother Irenicus, who is the end boss of the Shadows of Amn, the first portion of the second game, but sometimes she refuses or twists his original intent of her orders, and it's implied by a single character in one line that it was partially Bodhi's influence from the shadows behind Irenicus that fueled his original greed for power and then their subsequent exile. Unfortunately, it was just a singular line, never really again mentioned, an idea never really expanded upon, and so it felt more or less like just a throwaway line, but I still thought that it was worth mentioning that I was overly critical and emotional in one of my outbursts during a previous video when I've mentioned her as just this sort of a pawn, which she wasn't exactly, but still was just in his shadow, not just as an influence, but in the end, the brother was the final boss of Shadows of Amn. She was a subordinate to an extent. But I wanted to mention that this was something that I've overlooked and wanted to clarify that it was my mistake and bad memory combined with the fact that it really was just mentioned once in a single conversation, never again mentioned, which hopefully earned me some slack. But obviously, it's not just Bodhi. As female antagonist, I wouldn't have mentioned Baldur's Gate at all if it was just her. a sole exception. There are the Dark Elves, I've already mentioned. They have their own problems, but there is an entire Underdark section where the female matriarchs are main antagonists with pretty much no one above them, so they really fit into my criteria of a proper female villain. Then there is Ilacera, a female Ballspawn who is thus considered the protagonist's sibling and is hunting him. She is just an antagonist, purely evil, and faces the consequences of her actions. Great, I love this. Then there is Sendai, another Ballspawn, a drow female, another step sibling, quite eager on our demise, that faces the consequences of her choices. Unfortunately, these two are not exactly well developed characters. They exist as a canon fodder, which is slightly stronger than your usual canon fodder, but they still exist, they are there, and they fulfill their roles properly as evil antagonists that stand in the way of the protagonist's either conquest or attempt at stopping them from committing more atrocities. And obviously, then there is Melisande, the true end boss of the whole Baldur's Gate saga, also called Amelisande, former boss, priestess, and someone who is truly evil and keen on reaching her objective using any means necessary, and an actual character, well developed. We get to see both sides to her, a great female character all in all, and thus a great villain as well. And I'm genuinely happy that this exists. Also, BioWare managed to create one of my favorite characters and by far favorite romances with Viconia, an evil character portrayed in a believable way, a possible companion, yet with a different side to her that can be brought out with the correct approach. From the sentimental point of view, I still love Neverwinter Nights more, and Erebeth as my all-time favorite from the original campaign, obviously. She takes the crown of nostalgia-fueled favorites in terms of romance and my own headcanon and what her real ending was, and the protagonists of Neverwinter Nights. If I leave out all semblances of common sense, but obviously Myconia, Baldur's Gate are way more complicated, well, way more sophisticated in terms of storytelling and their characters. I'm aware of that, but Neverwinter just has this soft spot in my heart and I'm never going to give it up. In general, I am truly thankful that the old entries from the Forgotten Realms were created by the real BioWare, and also the Knights of the Old Republic series, which offers some really good characters and also some decent female characters, some decent female villains even. To me, they tick the right checkboxes. That's what I wanted to say. Also wanted to mention that I have my own endings for both Arbet and Viconia. I don't care that I might play this tough guy. It's in some way working out martial art, but in the end, I am unabashed to admit that I can't play evil characters and I do like me my happy endings. Jahira's epilogue being a great example of that. I did mention some things that even in Baldur's Gate that I've been just gushing all over. There are some things that I would like to avoid in my stories. Even during the character creation, you are informed that there are no significant differences between picking male or female in terms of what you can achieve, and yet in the game, all the ladies of the night that are just outside in the city are all women. The random NPCs, the waitresses, tavern benches, they are all women, which in that kind of settings, I don't think it's something that I would like to have. On the other hand, the slavers leading the Thieves Guild are men. Almost all the random shadow thieves encounters outside are men. On the other hand, the vampires that serve under Bodhi are women, so that somehow manages to balance out itself, but the Shadow Thieves leaders are men, so at least there are some evil female subordinates in their guilds that these are some minor concerns, but not exactly a big deal considering the plethora of great evil female characters that Baldur's Gate offers, but these things are just something that I would like to be aware of when I am writing my own story, specifically those waitresses and ladies of the night that are still tied by our world standards, and even the stories of these side characters are usually heavily influenced by how the world used to be during, I don't know, Middle Ages for women and the opportunities that they were presented with. Neverwinter Nights is a bit more balanced in this exact thing, and I'm very much again thankful for that. All NPCs, friendly and foes alike, are presented in a believable way with equal opportunities regardless of their gender in that game. There is one problem with a story situated in the Forgotten Realms, and especially the games, which is stakes, with resurrection existing and coming back from the dead all the time. Characters just occasionally kind of refuse to die. In the Baldur's Gate 2, you find yourself confronting the Baal spawns, for example, more than once, including Irenicus and Bodhi, even after you have killed them, which erases portion of those consequences that I've ranted on and on about in some of the previous videos. Now, after 30 minutes of useless dribble, I am finally able to get to rapid arrows for at least a bit. The book that I've had was this sort of a complete series of the comic books, a collection, and usually a single page would be this sort of a finished, complete part of maybe a bigger adventure, but usually it was a contained, short, very short story, occasionally with some lesson to learn or something like that. And we are beginning with Mirek Dushin, who's meeting for the very first time Jarek Metelka, who's currently being surrounded by enemies, some boys from a not so righteous club who are threatening him with some rather unsavory violence for some alleged insults that he supposedly hurled at them, which he denies. And while his punishment is underway, Mirek Dushin, obviously, as the good guy he is, decides to save him by shouting that a police is coming. And afterwards, when Yarkov figures out that it was all a ruse to save him by Mirek, they decide to form a friendship for life and are actually going to declare war on the enemy club of boys. The other club calls themselves Dark Riders, and they will be enemies for the Club of Rapid Arrows in the future as well. Next time, the Dark Riders are seeking revenge, trying to find Mirek, pretending to be his friends, and when they see Mirek and Yarka, they are ready to surround them and deliver some beating, but they are met with another boy, Indra Hoyer, who's just hanging around on a conveniently placed box, and they manage to hide there, and Indra Hoyer deceives the Dark Riders and also decides to join Mirek and Yarka because he has some grudges against the Dark Riders of his own. They even attempt to eavesdrop on the meeting Dark Riders usually have every Friday. They distract the guard, find the meeting place, and when they are finally ready to listen on the Dark Riders' plans, unfortunate disaster strikes. We even see for the first time one of the catchphrases that some of the boys occasionally use, something along the lines of "God damn it," but my best translation would be "by all planters," which Indra exclaims right after a cliff they were sitting on comes loose and they are sent tumbling right into the middle of the Dark Riders. So after they are able to leave beaten yet unbroken, they are ready to enact some revenge of their own. The Rapid Arrows, not yet called that, but the three boys are organizing a race between anyone who's willing to participate. The Dark Riders join as well and are ready to compete for the reward that was offered by some girls who promised to create a flag for whoever wins this race. Unfortunately, the leader of Dark Riders is not exactly a talented runner. Apparently, his style is comparable to a young elephant, and knowing that his victory would be almost impossible since Mirek is who it is, he decides to attempt and ruin the race, ruin Mirek's attempt at running by throwing a log under his feet, which works. Mirek tumbles and the Dark Riders retreat in glee, but unfortunately their celebration is rather short-lived because the rest of the logs are then hurled by the spectators and the boys and everyone involved in the race on the heads of the retreating Dark Riders, delivering just punishment, and the girls deliver on their promise, creating a flag for Mirek to commemorate his victory that would happen without the intervention from the Dark Riders. Now I wanted to touch upon the art, which is quite weird. It's not exactly, I would say, conventional. They are sometimes portrayed in a rather inconsistent way, sometimes looking very young, sometimes looking way more mature than in the previous panel, some of the boys being slightly hard to recognize in some scenario when they are further away from the point of view that we see the comic. They are slightly distorted, yet they are very detailed when they are close by. I think it's rather charming, and I do remember liking the art alongside the stories and the lessons learned. So I'm looking forward to continuing with Rapid Arrows, but I'm already at almost 20 minutes, so this is where I'm going to end it for this video.